me introduce myself first. My name is Michel DÉMARRE. I'm French. I worked with the public service in France for about 17 years, including a 1-year secondment with the World Bank in Washington some 36 years ago. That's a long time ago. And after that, I joined road construction companies with the private sector. I worked for the last 20 years with a large construction company named Colas. Some of you may know this company. And as an illustration of my joint interest and involvement with the public and the sector, an anecdote. In 2008, the same week, I was elected president of EIC, European International Contractors, and president of the French National Committee of PRC. So I've always went on I've gone to work with the private sector. This will give an opportunity to give the camera and microphone, especially microphone, must remain off so that we avoid to have wrong noise in our webinar. If you want to ask questions, you may do so. And even more than questions, if you have comments, if you want to make speeches or observations, please feel free to do so. You will be allowed at the end because one of my colleagues will collect all the questions to the panelists. But again, if these are not questions, simply positions, you may do so as well. This is a very open webinar. We want to get as much advice as possible from the participants. We will have a limited number of questions, but feel free to ask, and anyway, we will take care of possible answers even after the seminar. This is how to name yourself clearly in Zoom so that we can identify you easily. This seminar is being recorded and will be made public on PIARC's website and YouTube channel. And our program today is, first I will make a rather short introduction to the webinar as chair of Task Force 1.3 of PIARC. Then I will leave the floor to Professor Lavagnon IKA, who is a professor in management and project management at University of Ottawa, Canada, and he will introduce himself and make a presentation. Then we should have a participation, and we shall have, because I see his name showing up, we will have a presentation or a comment by Jean-François, practice manager for transport in West Africa. I want to thank Jean-François wholeheartedly because I know his agenda was very tight for those last weeks and days, and I really thank him for attending today. So let me exchange a little bit.
Please, Michel. Claude Van Hulten raised his hand.
Okay. Let me. How do I give him the floor? Can you take the floor right away?
May I take it?
Go ahead.
Our president, who asked me to excuse him, and Patrick is the same. They have another meeting at the same time. And that's why I join with much pleasure your seminar, Michel. You know that I supported your introduction of the project, the different stages. And for me, it's an honor and a pleasure to participate today as completely non-specialist, but I want to enjoy that kind of seminar. And we are not so many, but we are the best. So please, Michel, I give you the floor back.
Thank you, Claude. Thank you. And thank you for your continuous support in setting up these task forces on the good preparation of project. I already had the opportunity to thank you for that in Dakar, but I'm happy to renew my thanks to you again. Okay. Now, I think I'm not going to elaborate too much on PIARC. Most people around know what PIARC is. I'm going to stop this, and I will try to go to my own presentation. Let's start with my presentation. I will try to make it as short as possible because I would like to have more time for discussion, questions, comments, whatever. As Claude van Roten reminded us, we had two task forces actually on this topic. The first one, Task Force 1.1, was launched in February 2020, just before the COVID lockdown. The importance of the good preparation of projects and the main drivers for setting up this task force were improved bankability, acceptance, accountability, and transparency. Bankability was a key word in that because we heard that there is money for infrastructure projects in different countries, and in particular in Africa, but they failed to reach finance. And I think Lavagnon will report a bit. So we were in charge of this task force. Then the COVID came, and we worked for 2 years without any in-person meeting. And yet we succeeded in finishing our work in time by producing 2 reports. The first one early 2021, the final one early 2022. And these reports are available on PIARC website. I find in particular the second one is worth having a look into because it's a collection of case studies. There are case studies from different countries, sometimes several case studies for one country, and they show a diversity of well-prepared projects, which may be of interest to you. I will share with you the main conclusions, but there were, of course, more. We found that 3 overarching issues must be addressed for a project to qualify as a good, well-prepared project. And these are stakeholder management, risk management, and communication management. When we say stakeholder management, what we have in mind is a large variety of stakeholders. Can be from public utilities to nearby residents, can be from other ministries to NGOs. So we have a wide definition of stakeholders. I will not expand too much on risk management, which would deserve a long discussion. And I will mention communication management, communication that has to be geared to the stakeholders previously identified. Now, with these conclusions, we were very happy, but we felt that we had some shortcomings in our conclusions. Why? Because we did not have any participant from low-income and lower middle-income countries. We had participants from high-income countries, from upper income, middle income countries, but not from what I call here low and lower middle income countries. And in particular, we did not have any question on financing of preliminary studies, as if high-income countries or upper middle-income countries did not have any problem for financing their preliminary studies. But we know this is a problem for many developing countries. Another issue we failed to identify was training and retaining competent managers in road and transport administrations. This is not specific to developing countries, but I think it is more acute in developing countries than in industrialized countries. And also, finally, the availability of national technical standards and guides. All high-income countries and upper middle-income countries we found in our first task force had their own technical standards and guides. But this is not often the case for developing countries, especially in African countries. So we were conscious of these shortcomings, and discussing with the Secretariat General, we proposed, and this was accepted, to extend the work to low and lower middle income countries with a new task force, which was accepted. And so task force 1.3 was born. We kept a majority of former members of the previous task force, but we were happy that some participants from low and lower middle income countries joined, especially Mr. Mohamed Lai from Ageroute, Senegal, who has joined our team. He's unable, unfortunately, to attend today, but he's very active and he will go on participating very carefully in our work. How do we work? We have monthly virtual meetings each first Tuesday. We decided to set up this open webinar today because we found it would be a good opportunity for people from any kind of horizon who have an interest in the project preparation to join and leave their comments with us. We are not only reaching out to countries themselves, but also to external organizations, because we find that development banks in particular, but also commercial banks or other institutions play an important role in financing road projects and financing preliminary studies. And finally, we should have a face-to-face meeting in March next year, jointly with Technical Committee 3.3 in Dakar. Technical Committee 3.3 is in charge of asset management. This may seem a little apart from the issue of project preparation, but I will come later to this, and I think there are common points that are worth looking into. While I was in Dakar early November this year, I had the opportunity, thanks to Clemente Poon, who is our Spanish-speaking secretary, but also the representative of PIAC national committees, to make a presentation of our work on Task Force 1.3. I distributed a questionnaire on what we thought could be the main factors impacting negatively project preparation. And here are the results. We did not get too many answers, only 13. I hope you can see the results in full. I cannot, because the last column I cannot see, but I have it on a separate paper. 13 answers. a maximum of 3 stars per answer, that would give a maximum total number of 39. And we see we have some issues that are very close to 39. In particular, capacity building, training and retention of managers, availability of reliable input data, and available financing for project studies. All the issues we have listed here seems to be relevant. It looks like the less relevant would be the availability of national technical standards and guides. But this is a bit of a surprise to me because, especially in African countries, some countries have to face designs from engineering companies from different continents. And if I know from my own experience, it's difficult to be familiar with one single set of national standards if you have to be familiar with a set of international standards, even more difficult for countries. So I'm a bit surprised that this availability of national technical standards is not listed as a good precondition or prerequisite for well-prepared project, but anyway, we can discuss this later. What else? Have we failed to identify some important problems? What about road project financing? There are fewer and fewer development banks that finance roads. And it's probably going to be, maybe I should not say worse, but more difficult for development banks to finance roads in a not too distant future because of this commitment of development banks to align with Paris Agreement by end 2023. So what does it mean for development banks to align with Paris Agreement when we are speaking about road projects? Which roads are we talking about? Are we talking about rural roads, about streets in cities linked to traffic projects, to public transport projects? Are we speaking about fragile states? Are we speaking about people that have huge problems of resilience of their roads? Which taxonomies are going to be used? I want to quote here a saying by Mr. Dr. MARTEAU in a AIIB conference in 2021. He said there are more than 200 taxonomies being drafted by various organizations currently worldwide. Are these taxonomies going to converge? OECD is in charge in some respect, but it's a complicated task. There are new initiatives for quality infrastructure, the Blue Dot Network, Fast Infra. I don't know how familiar you may be with those initiatives, but they all aim at setting up a kind of certification or labelization framework for quality infrastructure. What will be the future of these initiatives? It's probably too early to say. How are we going to deal with such an increasing complexity? We will need more data. We will need more data to put roads in their context of transport in a country or in a regional approach. This is going to be really an increasing complexity. We will have to get more data, and this will cost more money. Who is going to finance these preliminary studies? This is an open question we would like to solve and possibly to get answers to that. This is the objective of this webinar. I've put here only a couple of photographs. I did not have all photographs from this wonderful TF13 team. Let me introduce them. Myself, Monique Aubry, Chris Fourneau from Europe, UK, Magdalena Karolak from Poland, Samantha Dladla from South Africa, Jürgen Simu from Sweden, Clemente Poon from Mexico, and eventually Mohamed Lai from Senegal. But there are more. We have attending today Enrique Perez from Spain, and I've seen him, and possibly some other ones. So I'll stop here. I will give the floor to Lavagnon, who will guide us into the difficulties of projects, of large projects in developing countries. I stop here my sharing and I leave the floor to Lavagnon.
Thanks so
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Michel, for the nice introduction. And I would like to thank you as well for inviting me along with Monique. Hi, everybody. My name is Lavagnon IKA. I'm a professor of project management with much interest in transportation projects. I've written extensively on transportation project cost overruns and benefit shortfalls in both the West and the rest, and the rest of the world. I have examined more than 3,000 World Bank funded projects, including a number of transportation projects in my samples of studies. And I have published widely on why projects fail in Africa and what can be done about it. So for today, you are about to invest in a big road project in Africa. So here is what you would like to know about how Countess breaks projects in Africa and what can be done about it. So the title of my presentation today is straightforward. To avoid the road to nowhere in Africa, let us think Countess in our project preparation. Now, so born and raised in Benin, a tiny French-speaking country in Africa, close to Nigeria. My exposure to gloom and doom in projects started back home. So I've seen a number of projects being unfinished. I've seen a number of projects experiencing time overruns, others experiencing cost overruns, still others experiencing beneficiary and stakeholder dismay, and still others experiencing sustainability shortfalls. But still, in other circumstances, in other specific circumstances, many projects do succeed in Africa. So this is a kind of paradox. So I've always wondered, what is the role that Countess play in the delivery of projects in Africa? Why is it that some of the projects, they fail in some of the contests? And why is it that some of the projects do deliver and meet expectations in similar context? So it's quite intriguing. So stress the focus of my presentation today on how Countess breaks projects in Africa and how we should weave into project preparation the role of Countess. So the outline of the presentation is straightforward. I'm going to start with a suggestion that we are experiencing or living in a transport project economy in Africa, but that comes with a couple of challenges, which I'm going to present about. And then I'm going to move to the focus of my presentation today, which is how Countess breaks roads projects in Africa. And I'm going to conclude with a few insights on how we can tame Countess, especially in the road delivery settings in Africa. So that's more or less the outline for action. Let us start with part one. That is, we live in a project economy. Well, the pendulum has swung over the years, I should say, over the decades, in terms of Africa being a hopeless environment to do business and deliver projects to a hopeful economy. Remember, the English magazine, The Economist, on its cover, wrote hopeless continent, but to May 2000, and putting on its cover a very interesting title, Africa Rising. So it seems that something is going on in Africa right now, and people are becoming more and more hopeful about the prospect of economic development in Africa. But I believe that this economic contest is quite important or not this. So take, for instance, what we experienced, Africa experienced just after the COVID-19 recession in 2020. Just after that, Africa was host to 7 out of 10 of the world's fastest growing countries, which is quite a feat, quite an achievement. I'm talking about Ethiopia, I'm talking about Uganda, I'm talking about Ivory Coast, Egypt, Ghana, Rwanda, and Kenya. And Africa is hosting the largest, free trade area right now, with more than 1.3 billion people, a market, according to the World Bank. So considering this hopeful sort of economic context and very promising economic context in Africa, naturally you would expect lots of investment in infrastructures and lots of investment in institutions. Because these two are quite important to sustain the growth of economy in Africa. So you have lots of projects naturally. So I'm not going to go through all of them. Think about the Nairobi Expressway, a tollway in Kenya, for instance, of 668 million. Think about the TGV, the high-speed train in between Tanger and Casa in Morocco, $2 billion. Think about the high-speed train, the TGV between Abuja and Kaduna in Nigeria, 84.9 million. Okay, so you have plenty of projects like that, and that is the reason why I would suggest that Africa is living a project economy now. So these are lots of projects, lots of investment, and these investments are welcome. The countries are not saying no. We've seen that with Africa cooperation with China, where China is funding a number of mega projects from east to west, from south to north in Africa. But this booming project economy comes with a set of challenges. The first one I would suggest is that, well, it's a big problem. Take, for instance, the McKinsey report McKinsey report 2 years ago. They've come to a conclusion that 80% of projects fail at the feasibility and business plan stage. That is an indictment of project design in Africa. So that's a big challenge, I would suggest. And this challenge is related to, the particular context of Africa. And by the way, project design is deeply embedded in context. So consider, for instance, the former CEO of Swiss Bank, Tidjane Thiam, had to say about that a couple of months earlier this year. When I talk to investors, I tell them, if you want to multiply your investment by 100, go to Silicon Valley. If you want to multiply it by 1,000, go to Africa. And I'm struck just this week. I've had 3 different video calls with investors, all American, who already have significant investment in Africa and want to invest more. So the problem is not the capital or money. The problem is, I think, the capital is ready to come. The problem is, I think, there is an intermediation problem. We need more and more stakeholders, whether they are consulting firms, investment banks, or consultants, who can make the link between the demand for capital in Africa and the supply. So that means that, you know, intermediation is a problem. Project feasibility studies are a problem. Project preparation, to use the keyword of this session, is a big, big problem. And that speaks to the peculiar context in which Africa is delivering its projects. The second major challenge is very well known. Projects tend to fall short. Of course, they tend to fall short elsewhere. You know, I live in Ottawa, where, you know, we were not able to deliver our LRT on time. And, you know, the LRT could not sustain the first winter. So project delivery, worries, issues, setbacks are not solely the case in Africa. We have project failures elsewhere. And I've seen that in many transportation projects, lots of cost overruns. My own research has shown that about half of projects, half of transportation projects worldwide tend to experience cost overruns. And that about 60% of these projects, more or less, are prone to optimism bias. But in Africa, things are a little bit dire, I would suggest. The World Bank's private arm, the International Finance Corporation, IFC, has come to a conclusion that about half of its Africa investment projects tend to be failures. And if you look at the statistic from the World Bank IG, the independent evaluation group that assesses the quality the delivery and performance of World Bank funded projects, including in Africa, they will tell you that roughly 20% of these projects, including lots of transportation projects, are failures, according to their own estimates. My own research on about 3,000 projects funded by World Bank projects will suggest that roughly 20% of them are a failure to deliver the expected impact in terms of health, for instance, education, capacity building, governance, anti-corruption, etc. And if you look at the internal rate of return, I've been able to assess the internal rate of return, the average internal rate of return of the proposed project at the preparation phase in a sample of 3,000 World Bank projects, a study that we published recently in Journal of Development Studies. The average internal rate of return at project preparation is around, project appraisal, to be more specific, is around 25%. At completion, it is around 23%. You see that there is a gap of at least 2% there. And like I said, I've seen plenty of unfinished projects in my home country, Benin, and that is still the case now. You have 19 abandoned projects in Nigeria. You have 14,000 abandoned projects or unfinished projects in Ghana. So you see, project failures and abandonments are a big problem in Africa. And of course, projects tend to fall short because many countries right now are borrowing money to fund their investment projects. But the challenge is that they are getting indebted. So the rate of debt is quite important in countries like Ghana, for instance. So, and that's a struggle. So you have lots of challenges coming with project investment and as well their failures. But there is a paradox. If the IFC suggests, for instance, that about 50% of a project fail, then it means that about 50% succeed. We don't say that quite often and quite enough. So while some project meets their time and budget targets, others do not. So it seems that context might be playing a role here. So look at the second Niger Bridge project in Nigeria, which is part of the Trans-Africa Highway project between Lagos in Nigeria and Mombasa in Kenya. So this project, this $1 billion project, was 10 months late. And think about, the Addis Ababa Djibouti railway project, a $4 billion project. On time and budget, the Chinese partners delivered this project on time and budget, which is quite an achievement. Again, the $2 billion LRT project in Ottawa, here, where I live, was not on time. So it's quite a feat to deliver such a large-scale major project, I would say mega project in Africa, and to be able to deliver that on time and budget. The Trans-Sahara Highway project, a $100 million project, is already late. And if you look at, the cost performance of the high-speed train between Tanger and Casa, that TGV was, experienced a cost overrun about $300 million. So you see, contests might be playing a role in the delivery of major or large scale, if not mega road projects in Africa. So the question is obvious. What is the role that contests play and how contests can break road projects in Africa? Well, here is the challenge. Most of the projects, many, I should not say most, many of the projects or many of the investments, many of the project investments are what the Nobel Prize of Economics, Duflo, will call common sense projects, because they speak to basic needs that are yet to be covered in these resource-challenged countries. So if these common sense projects are being the subject of investment to meet specific and relevant goals or needs in the beneficiary populations, why is it that some of them fail and others succeed? Why is it that some succeed here and others fail there? Okay, I'm talking about similar projects. So I'm going to propose that we have three different kind of contests that derail project, that can make or break project. So in a paper that I wrote 10 years ago that is titled "Why Projects Fail in Africa and How We Can Remedy That," I distinguish between three overarching contexts or problem areas, if you prefer, that can harm the delivery and performance of large scale or major, if not mega projects in Africa. The first one is structural. We don't tend in project management to speak much about these contextual challenges, history and geography. I'm going to explain more with examples. Institutional issues like lack of capacity. Michel was talking about lack of standards, and the challenge of capacity building in his presentation. He is right. Lack of capacity is a big challenge. For instance, there is a reason why, in the case of the Addis Ababa Djibouti railway project, they were forced to turn to Chinese partners because Chinese partners, they do have the capacity. And Africa lacks capacity in terms of building these railways, for instance. And of course, you hear a lot about corruption. Okay, you hear a lot about corruption in Africa. So that's a big institutional challenge. And as well, the last category includes managerial contests or managerial issues, including poor design, poor planning, poor execution, cost overruns, benefit shortfalls, bias, or error, scope changes, complexities, uncertainties, stakeholder management, risk management issues, and so on. Communication, as Michel put it in his introductory remarks. So these are the three contests that I would like to focus on. Let us take them one after one. Now, structural contests. A case study here, an interesting case study here is the 4 billion Addis Ababa Djibouti railway project. May I remind you that Ethiopia, you see that on the map, is a landlocked country in Africa. And a country that is experiencing a booming economy. But in the economic context of Ethiopia, Ethiopia got unreliable electrical grid. But they put together the 4 billion Addis Ababa Djibouti railway project. Why? Because this landlocked country needs an outlet to sea. Djibouti is a country that offers that possibility to join sea. So that's the reason why, you know, they put together the rail project between Addis Ababa and Djibouti to do what? To cut transportation times between the two countries by 3/4. That's what I call a common sense project. The project makes sense. Now, here is the deal. Because the electrical grid is unreliable, then there were power outages. And because there were power outages, they could not run the trains. And because they could not run the trains, the project, the transportation project, the railway project could not deliver the expected benefits. So the project was delivered on time, within budget, only to fail to deliver benefits. That's what I call in my studies, the operation was a success, but the patient died. So if you consider a common sense project that is supposed to meet transportation needs, that all makes sense. And because of context, because of lack of power or electricity, reliable electrical grid, you fail to deliver benefits. That's worrisome. So that's one instance where the overarching context, I'm talking about the economy here and energy context, leads to failure to deliver benefits. Let us move to institutional context. Consider, for instance, Tshisekedi, who is the president of RDC, Congo-Kinshasa, if you want. So he put together a scheme for investing in road projects. Roads in throughout RDC, in Congo-Kinshasa, if you prefer, are a problem. So it all makes sense to invest in the building of roads throughout different cities. So once again, that's a common sense project, the Shide Jelu Road project. It's a $140 million project. But the project was late in Kinshasa. Only 2 kilometers of roads were delivered 8 months in. No start in many other cities. And when the agency, that is the anti-corruption agency, starts looking into the project, they realized that there was a planned scam. Okay, there was a planned scam. Okay, in French, because it's a French-speaking country, they say escroquerie programmée, planifiée, planned scam. Why? In the appraisal, the estimates in terms of the cost of building the road was between $350,000 per kilometer and $500,000 per kilometer. That was the estimate at the appraisal phase. At the contract phase, the cost was $982,000 per kilometer. This gap is considered due to a planned scam. So that's one instance of corruption being a plague in such a common sense project. The other challenge was capacity building because the Chinese partner in this case lacked the technical capacity. And these two are having a heavy toll on the road project and creating lots of delays and many other related challenges. So that's an example of the institutional context. I'm talking about corruption plus lack of capacity, hampering the delivery and performance of a project. Now, let us consider the third context category, which is the managerial context. Well, you hear about that in the news all the time. You hear about cost overruns. You hear about poor project preparation, to use our keyword today. You hear about poor initiation. You hear about poor planning. You hear about dismal execution. You hear about dirty politics. You hear about delays. You hear about risk analysis. You hear about coordination, improper coordination, and monitoring. A good example here is, let us go to South Africa, is the 130 million Nelson Mandela Bay Metropolitan Bus Rapid System Transit, which was set up just before the World Cup in South Africa. So that was a common sense project because, they lack transportation systems in this area. So they put together 60 buses, which were bought to refresh municipal bus service in 2009. The buses were used for some time during the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, but they have been idle since. Why? Because of design flaws, mainly, and poor governance. Example, the buses were too big for driving lanes. The doors were put on the wrong side, and other sort of nonsensical issues like that. And the supervision capacity of the city was little. So the oversight was not there. These are just examples of, managerial contests being at play and having a heavy toll on a project. So you see, that's how contests, the trifecta of structural contests, institutional contests, and managerial contests can break your project. And you need to be aware of that before you commit to any investment in Africa. Now, the question for policymakers and practitioners, the question for people like Monique and Michel on this task force is, what can we do now about that? How do we tame contests in road project delivery in Africa? Well, my own research is quite clear. You need to be aware of, contests, and you need to apprehend contests. How do I define contest, by the way? Because contest is a very complicated concept that that is fraught with ambiguity, and that not too many researchers try to define. And that leads to confusion, conceptual confusion in the literature. So with Mike is very well known for his works in transportation, on transportation project, cost overruns. We came to the following definition of contest. So what is contest? The formal or an informal setting in which a situation occurs. I'm talking about project delivery here. And that includes economic, political, legal, geographical, historical, institutional, and managerial circumstances. But that's just one part of the equation of contest. You need to consider as well the continual unfolding interaction between the situation and the setting. What do I mean by that? When I'm doing project delivery in Congo, Kinshasa, for instance, and then corruption is happening, then how is the project reacting to the overpricing that you saw at the contracting phase, for instance? So there is this continual unfolding interaction between the project delivery and things that are happening in the setting. But in most cases, like we've seen in our strategy classes, what we do when we say we are scanning the environment or we are scanning the context is that we just consider contextual, what I'm going to call contextual prefaces: economic context, political context, legal context, environmental context, and so on. So we scan the environment at the project preparation phase. And then we don't do much to follow through during the execution phase. It's like, in our view, contest is supposed to be stable. But in fact, things happen throughout projects. Things happen in our own life. And similarly, things happen in the delivery of projects, in their execution. So these contests, therefore, tend to be dynamic, and the project will interact with them and can change them, it can change the context in unexpected ways. Now, so how do we go about that? I would suggest we have two different contests, so using the same sort of similar dichotomy. In strategy, we have existing strategy, as Henry Mintzberg will say, and we have emerging strategy. The same thing applies to contests here. You have the existing context before the project, and you have the emerging context in the wake of the project or during execution. So you have the existing context at the project preparation phase, and you have the emerging context during execution. So what we need to do is to ask ourselves, under what circumstances do projects fail or succeed? So how do we do that? We won't go about what of the policymakers. What is it that the policymakers want? They want to scan the structural context, they want to scan the institutional context, they want to scan, and they need to do that at project preparation phase and during execution. So it's both before and after the project approval. And these different contexts, the structural, institutional, managerial conditions, they tend to be, in interaction between each other. And that the kind of them, that's made the monitoring of contests difficult. That's the reason why, in a study on a capacity building project, not transportation project, back to 2017, we were able to devise the following theory. To succeed, a project needs high levels of multi-stakeholder commitment, high level of multi-stakeholder collaboration, high level of strategic alignment, and high level of strategic adaptation to the changing context. And you will see that collaboration, commitment, alignment, and adaptation, they are in interaction with the three overarching context. And to finish, you need to view, because let me give you an example. Because complexity and uncertainty are part and parcel of the delivery of large-scale projects, especially when stakeholders start negotiating and renegotiating value, because stakeholders are thinking about value distribution. And that's a big challenge in many transportation projects in Africa. So how do you make sure that if people want some specific aspects of the project to cover some of their specific needs, because that will create value for them, how do you cater to that so that you change the scope of the project during execution to fit these new needs that emerge after project approval? These are challenges, and the only way we can do that is to embrace context, not resist the changing context, but embrace it. So the project plan is supposed to evolve. So that's what I have to tell you about how context can break road projects in Africa. I have more to say about that, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Lavagnon. I think it was really an enlightening presentation, because you succeeded in showing us, I would say, real life examples, but at the same time with showing us the big picture. and the kind of academic viewpoint that I think is very interesting, because we as contractors, we often lack this capacity of making comparisons between projects. And I thank you very much for your presentation, which in my view reaches conclusions that are not that different from what we found in our first task force. And that's a bit reassuring, but we need to get deeper into that and find more by comparing our work. I would like now to give the floor to Jean-François MARTEAU. I hope he's around. Yes, he is. And I would like to thank him again for being able to attend today, because I understand he has a very difficult agenda for the last days. I really don't want you to have the feeling that we have placed the World Bank in a hot seat, because we mentioned the bank and some percentages which are a bit detrimental. But I respect too much this organization to put you in that kind of situation. And what I would like to learn from you is, on the one point, what is the current situation you can see in your position as in charge of transport in West Africa? How do you consider the situation now? And perhaps more importantly, what do you think the situation will be in the future after multilateral development banks have defined and determined what is a good alignment with the Paris Agreement when we're talking about roads? And I would like to thank you in advance for your presentation in this respect. Jean-François, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michel. Can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So first of all, I would like to apologize because I thought with us today, because I was actually in the field with him yesterday, and I came back from this field, and he's still in the field with our teams on a rural roads project that we are starting with the government of Senegal. Before going into my presentation and sharing it, I just want to piggyback on what Lavagnon said, because I think we are really pretty much aligned on many of the aspects that he was mentioning. And for us, working, for example, in the Sahel region, the issue of adaptation and flexibility is critical, because sometimes you need to actually reallocate investment between areas when there are areas that are not safe anymore, and that's very critical. And I'm kind of at the end of a tour in several countries, looking at some of our rural roads project, and the way population are involved in the design and the beginning of projects is really completely fundamental, and can do the failure or the success of a project, especially in fragile and conflict environment, where if you have the population with you, that can limit the risk for the contractor that is doing the work tremendously. So on that, when you do investment that are good for the population, or that the population have chosen, is going to have a fundamental role in the success of the project. Before starting, I am going to introduce myself briefly. I'm Jean-François MARTEAU. I'm the practice manager for transport in the World Bank for part of West Africa. But I've just started this job 3 months ago, so I can't say that I have a full understanding yet of what's going on in Africa. Before that, I was managing transport projects in Africa and in Europe and Central Asia. and I also managed an office of the World Bank in Central Asia. So I've had a kind of diverse experience, and I've managed all kinds of transport projects and not only roads. On the World Bank side, on the topics related to Paris alignment and to climate, and especially climate adaptation, which is the big advantage of roads projects in general. The World Bank transport team is really thinking around it, and one of my colleagues, Ching Cheong, who has joined the meeting as well and can also complement me, and can complement me if you have some questions in with that. And now I'm going to start. Hope I will manage. Let me see. Do you see it or not?
It's good?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Let me see, because for some reason it has gone. Okay, let me. Okay. Okay. Do you see my screen, or do you see the presentation itself right now?
I think we can see your screen so that you may wish to enlarge the big slide, if at all possible.
Okay.
Actually, we see both screens, the one you are presenting and the next one.
And the next one, yeah.
Okay.
It's not a big deal, but
Okay. Yeah. I don't know why. Yeah. Okay, we'll do it this way. Sorry,
no problem.
So
we can read
okay,
it. That's
so first of all, I think that Michel is right that the road sector has been a bit under stress in development banks for some time, for various reasons, including incidents in related to contracts. On the World Bank side, we had a lot of issues with gender-based violence in some of our projects, and that has kind of created a bit of a lack of appetite on our management side on roads projects. The climate agenda has also played a role, but that combined with the emergence of the climate agenda has forced us to look much more, and I think rightly so, at resilient infrastructure, mostly on the adaptation side to avoid repairs and to minimize the consequence to the livelihoods and well-being of people. So I've put here a few figures related to the resilience aspect. When we assess that the direct cost of natural disasters is around $18 billion a year, the disruption to the caused by this hazard and the poor maintenance and mismanagement of infrastructure has a cost that is 20 times more than the cost of the events themselves. So, and we also calculated that the benefit of investing in more resilient infrastructure in low and middle income countries normally would benefit $4 for each dollar invested. So that shows that it's something that is really interesting and worthwhile. Now, Africa and South Asia have the highest loss for reliable infrastructure. The two examples that you have here is based on some projects that we have to do. In Uganda, right now, even moderate floods block enough streets to make it impossible to for a third of the population to the transport disruption in the country are due to floods, and the flood-related disruption costs more than $100 million per year. And this is something that we are starting to document in every country, and which is very significant. Urban transport is a growing sector that has 16%, railways 7%, and the rest is really limited. So roads are still the biggest part of our portfolio, but the focus of this portfolio is progressively changing, and the resilience dimension is now absolutely systematic in all our roads projects, with climate proofing, and this is really our biggest thinking right now in the road sector. What we do on resilience as well, together with our colleagues on the disaster risk management, is to try each time we do a sector project in a country to do a vulnerability assessment of the road network in order to roads that you need to repair and have passable at all times, if you want to minimize the cost of disruption due to flooding. So here we did several countries. Mozambique is a country in which we finance a project. Mozambique is subject to a lot of natural events. And when we did this vulnerability assessment of the country, actually after a big flooding event, the road rehabilitation was prioritized, and with assessment able to prioritize how we would do the repairs first, and that was used also by the other multilateral development banks, and that's something that I'm highlighting, because we see this almost in every low and middle income countries. At first, there is not always a good vulnerability assessment of the networks, and as a result, when we try to set up, for example, secondary roads programs or rural roads programs, we cannot benefit from these assessments to help prioritize and to have something more useful. So that's something on which we are trying as much as possible to help, but that clearly can have a big impact. Now, this has consequences both on the design of projects and on the policies as well. On the design, I mean, you are all familiar with the topic, so I'm not going to detail. On the roads policy, that often implies to update the country's road design standards, because a lot of designs are obsolete, and when we do even rehabilitation, mostly the culverts and structures like that are usually not well sized anymore, given the impacts of climate change. And also integrate and streamline the climate change into the country's road asset management systems. I know that Pierre has been working on road management systems sometimes, but and it's still a problem in many low and middle income countries. So sometimes it's integrating that dimension into the RAMs, but sometimes it's just building the RAMs with climate aspects being included. And of course, the budget and resources available to maintenance and contracting is something that is a kind of long-standing problem that you are all also familiar with, but which is getting a bit of an increased recognition, because the climate events that we've had over the last few years in almost all continents has really brought that back to the forefront. Now, when we look at the project that we are doing, however, you can see that there are still in the head that we are if you look at the 5 years of resilience, which would be conditions and institutional capacity and coordination, we looked into our portfolio to see the percentage of projects on which we were really helping different aspects. And you can see, for example, that the system planning, to which something like the vulnerability assessment would belong to, is something that we are so we have a problem we are not doing something, and doesn't mean you don't necessarily get a lot of support in it. Institutional capacity is supported more in high-income countries, but but it's because in high-income countries they have financial means, and they are looking for us mostly for assist, not for money, but more for knowledge. Operations and maintenance is something that we are I don't know, maybe, yeah, I'm not going to go too much onto details because I'm wondering whether I'm interpreting the slide well, but Jean, can you step in on this on this graph? The percentage that you indicate is the percentage of climate co-benefits or percentage of projects that do something?
Hi, hello everyone. So the color coding is based on the climate adaptation co-benefit, which measures the amount of lending loans dedicated by the World Bank to tackle the climate problems. So the red color means means from the project that has the highest co-benefit, and the green color means which has lower co-benefit, and the percentage of the percentage is showing how much we are doing in these projects. For example, on the operation, so you can see almost all three colors has the same level, same kind of level engagement in the operation and the maintenance. However, if you look at institutional capacity, you will see those projects are rated high in terms of the climate adaptation benefit, co-benefit, has more activities designed in the institutional capacity strengthening side. So I think this portfolio analysis shows that in order to increase our co-benefit, our dedication to tackle the climate issues in our lending operations, we should do more in the institutional capacity building, and we should definitely do more on the system planning, like integrating the climate risk considerations into the road asset management system. We are moving towards doing this systematic approach to, instead of doing repair and fix once the flooding or extreme events comes, we would love to holding hands with the government and trying to help them to do more systematic planning in order to avoid those expensive repairs. So that's what this a bit complicated figure means.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thanks for stepping in. And that coming back to something that Michel said at the beginning. I mean, whether the Paris alignment is a fundamental change in the way the World Bank or other NDBs are going to consider climate. I mean, since Paris, we already have since not Paris alignment, but the previous Paris Climate Summit, we have had commitments in having 30% of our portfolio having direct climate co-benefits. So there are plenty of methodologies to calculate those climate co-benefits. There is a full unit in the World Bank that is doing only that. And when you look at it from an overall portfolio standpoint, if you take, for example, sectors like, I don't know, budget support or governance, education, health, those sectors are not supposed to provide climate benefits because and our percentage of commitment is for the overall amount of our envelopes, which means that on sectors where you can actually have a climate effect, we are requested to get 40, 50, 60% of so-called climate co-benefits under our project. So that can create a bias towards the projects for which the benefits to the climate is the biggest. which is good, for example, for urban transport, because you can always have a big mitigation effect when you have a mass transport project. According to our taxonomy, it gives you 80 or 90% co-benefits. On the road side, it's mostly resilience and adaptation that is going to count. And for this, it depends on whether you consider that as an incremental benefit if you have more resilient infrastructure, or if you consider that any newly rehabilitated road, according to modern resilience design, is counting in full. So it's a bit artificial, but it also goes, I would say, against, for example, motorway expansion or things like that that usually have a negative effect on mitigation, while having a moderate effect on positive effect on adaptation. So this thinking has been going on even before the Paris alignment was there. And that transitions to my next slide, which is that if you look at road project preparation, we are already obliged to do 5 diverse work related to climate in order to do our preparation. That doesn't mean that you are not getting your financing approved if a value has this or that value, but it is already captured. So one is the GHG accounting, to know the GHG impact of the project, both in terms of construction and operations. We use the shadow price of carbon in appraisal to refine the economic analysis. We do a climate and disaster screening to look at the vulnerability. So it's not necessarily a full national vulnerability assessment like I showed you in Mozambique, but it's also, it can be focused on the project itself. And then we consider measures or strategies that can mitigate or manage the risk. Then we quantify those famous climate co-benefits that Tim was mentioning earlier, which help us kind of do the accounting of what share of our amount is dedicated to climate finance. And then we have to have climate-related indicators in our projects. The example that is given here is kilometers of road rehabilitated to climate resilience standards. Now, what we've seen so far in our lending in transport is an increase in the climate co-benefits. You see that now we are managing to get 50 to 60% of climate co-benefits. All our projects do have a positive impact on climate. As you can see, the adaptation mostly comes from the resilience side and from the road sector. The mitigation benefits from urban transport, railways, or waterways projects. So basically and when you see the biggest increase is actually observed over the last 5 years on the adaptation side, and that's mostly because we try to really refocus our roads portfolio towards the resilience dimension, and also quite a bit towards rural network and rehabilitation, which is not always consistent with and not necessarily too much into big development of infrastructure. Now, the Paris Alignment and Transport Project. Now, all our operations will need to be Paris aligned by July 1st, 2023, on climate action plan. And it means that besides the poverty reduction and shared prosperity goals of the World Bank, any operation has to be consistent with the country's pathways toward low greenhouse gas emissions, and in line with the Paris Alignment goal for both mitigation and adaptation. So that means more pragmatically that we need to have methodologies that can be put in place that allow us to assess whether what we propose is Paris aligned or not, or whether things may require some adaptation to be Paris aligned. So right now there is a whole work that is going on the methodology that we should use, and that is led by colleagues that are mostly in our climate change unit. So with the participation of transport experts such as Ting. The idea is not to, and the idea is not to be as close as possible from something, because the idea is not that you have something that is so different of the country but can have some impact over time. It shouldn't at all. That's the idea, because I mean we all know, for example, that once electricity or energy systems go towards more cleaner systems, and once vehicles, especially cars, switch to electric, logically the climate impact of the road network will be much lower than it currently is. So we need to have that in mind. So in the methodology that we've shared, that is being developed in the World Bank and in the MDG framework, we know right now that some activities are considered as universally aligned, which means that they will not need a specific climate assessment or a specialized Paris alignment assessment. That's the case of all rehabilitation of existing roads, which would mean the same for operations and maintenance, and most rural roads, which are really giving basic connectivity, and or elements that are critical for the resilience of the network. So all those roads projects normally should be considered as universally aligned, which means that we would not need any additional, I would say, bureaucratic hassle before putting them in practice. So it's mostly a good news for the road sector. The problem is that you will have projects that will be in the so-called gray areas, and that's mostly road capacity expansion. And for those, we will need an assessment that that kind of verifies that if the country wants to maximize its development while respecting the Paris Agreement, that investment is necessary. So it is possible to see when there is a big growth in population or for big trade corridors as well. So, but it will require more assessment, knowing that with all the elements that I have given you earlier that we are already doing on our project, we will have most of the data that are needed for that. But what is true is that it will mean that the management, when it decides between several sectors what projects to do, the preparation of some of the roads projects will become probably a bit more complicated and can be a factor in risk aversion. But I would say on 80 or 90% of our projects, it shouldn't change anything. So sorry, I cannot be more precise because those guidelines that will define exactly the universally aligned types of projects are not validated yet. So our teams are going to start using these tools likely in January, because for the project that will be prepared and approved after July 1, we will need this Paris alignment confirmation. Forward-looking, I think we really plan to continue streamlining resilience in road infrastructure because we really believe it's a very very needed type of investment. We'll try to increase training programs and promote the open data knowledge repository. That remains a big issue in countries for preparation for climate resilient infrastructure development. I mean, obviously at the World Bank we fully agree with Michel's and Lavagnon's prior statements that quality of preparation is sometimes lacking, and so we are trying now for almost each of our projects. We have additional trust-funded resources that are looking specifically more at the resiliency of those projects. And we would like to set up more efficient preparation facilities. That is not yet done. So that's it for our presentation. We have several examples of publications that we have on the sector that are in this slide and that obviously can be available with us if needed. Thank you very much. The floor is back to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. Very interesting presentation, and I think it perfectly corresponds to what we had in mind when we invited you to participate in this webinar. I haven't seen any raised hand for questions to either Jean-François or Lavagnon or myself, but I would like to use my situation of presenter to ask Jean-François maybe 2 questions. The first one is about the commitment, the general commitment made by development banks. I understand you explained in detailed manner what all multilaterals are on the same line. If I take, for instance, the EIB, European Investment Bank, that has probably most, maybe 90% of their loans towards European countries, they might have a different approach to this, but it looks like some other banks, maybe the Asian Development Bank, the AIIB, could have also maybe not completely different. Do you have any information on that? Do you have some joint meetings with them to try and harmonize the criteria you've been mentioning?
Honestly, I don't have that information. I know that the work that we've been doing with our teams on how to apply Paris alignment on our projects has been done internally. I don't know if I mean I can relay that question to Ben and Nicolas who may have any information on that or not more.
Sorry, I don't have such information, but I can follow up with our global director and manager.
Okay, no, thanks. Yeah, we do. But Michel, in a nutshell, I'm fairly sure that in the end there will be nuances between different banks, as they say, is likely to be the most
stringent, probably.
Stringent. EBRD a bit less stringent than EIB, depending on the countries, and regional development banks, which are closer to their clients, will likely try to be more adaptive. And in the World Bank, I guess it will depend on the context. That's
okay.
That would be my
thank you very much. The reason why I asked this question is our webinar is focused on African countries today, yeah. But of course, in our task force, we also need to consider some low and lower middle income countries in other parts of the world. Maybe I'm wrong, the word road safety. How could road safety impact the evaluation of future investments in the road sector? And how could we kind of mitigate the results from, for instance, roadway expansion and possible gains we would get on road safety in this respect. Are there some approaches in this direction?
Is the question for Lavagnon or for myself, Michel?
It's for you for the beginning, but if Lavagnon wants to answer, he's welcome.
Okay. No, I think that, as you know, I think we are incorporating road safety already much more, but it's already part of the economic analysis, and as part of that, it's actually one of the big. If you actually make roads safer, it's actually a really big. It has a very high economic profitability. So I think that what we are doing on Paris alignment is not contradictory to. I mean, it's not linked to road safety, and we don't. We will continue to do more on road safety. It is in all our projects now, and I think we've done a lot more than before. For example, I think at some point the World Bank tended to kind of be further from looking at the design of the roads projects, but we've been back both for the resilience and for the safety aspects into looking much more closely at the design of what is proposed, because of the tremendous impact of safety facilities and when we, I mean, even last week when I was in Niger, we had a big discussion on even the signaling systems, because even in rural roads, I mean, it's good that NGOs are there and tell people to drive slower, but much more is needed than that. So on that, I would, on the safety aspect, it's I think it is part of our project, and it will continue. It will continue to be. And what I wanted to say as well is that there is really an effort on our side. We've done at country levels a new exercise which is called country climate development report, or I always mix up the acronym, but which is a report in which we try to say, okay, it's good to improve the climate, but you shouldn't prevent countries from developing, right? And that's specifically important for low-income countries. And the idea is really to take a balanced approach of that and say there is try to find an optimized development path, but not hindering the capacity of countries to develop. And that's super important. And that's also why we are fighting for the road sector to still be inside projects that we can do, because you cannot develop countries that have 50 or 70% of the population in rural areas without developing the infrastructure in rural areas. That's obvious. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's a very good message to Pjork.
I would make a quick comment, Michel, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay.
And then I give the floor
I fully
to Monique.
concur with the observation made by Jean-François on road safety. So in the approach of the World Bank, the safety of the roads tend to be considered as a success factor. That is why, you know, the World Bank is quite keen on looking at safety during project preparation. So what we am yet to see is safety being considered as a success criteria, like efficiency or effectiveness or relevance. That one, you know, I don't tend to see that more often.
I agree. Well, we are not going to do a discussion between just Lavagnon and myself, but just on that one. And that's where the presentation that he did was so interesting also for me, is that you need to place yourself in a much longer time frame than the time frame of a given project, which post-project evaluation has to happen 6 months after the closing,
Yes.
while you see the results in safety several years after. And that's something on which we need to work. So sorry, Michel, go ahead.
No problem. I just want to give the floor to Monique, who raised her hand.
Yes, thank you so much to Lavagnon and Jean-François. Really very, very interesting presentation and complementary from different perspectives. So very, this is the objective of the webinar, to listen to different perspectives and discuss about them. So I had a quite similar question as the one from Michel to you, Jean-François, but Michel asked a question on the security. My question was more about the how do you balance the view with resilience? I understand that given the climate change, we have no choice but to emphasize this aspect of any project. So road projects are in this way. But how do you make some sort of equilibrium at the same time to continue to develop the capability in lower income countries? So I guess it would be the same logic as the answer you give to Michel, but this was my question. And I have also a question from Lavagnon regarding resilience. So because I have the impression that in your research, what I know from your research, Lavagnon, I don't see that much this word of resilience. So my question is, how do you integrate, how do you see resilience in your approach of assessing projects in lower income countries? So we may start with Jean-François. Thank you.
Okay, your question is not very obvious to me, Monique, but I don't know. To me, we take both safety and resilience as elements that have to be part of the design of any project right now. The question is, and you are right on it, is that to find the right capacity, especially in design companies and in contractors to do it properly, the complexity of doing it is increasing. I would say, and I mean, others can chip in if I know some others in the audience are probably better equipped than myself to respond to that. What I would say is that right now on the design of major infrastructure, it is more or less covered well. Where I'm more worried is when you want to develop when you are getting into rural networks or secondary networks, where both the design and the implementation is usually done by firms of a smaller scale that don't always capture all the latest on both road safety and resilience. And on that's probably one of the areas in which MDBs have not been present enough, which is actually to work on the capacity of both design and contractors company, or make sure that it exists.
Alors,
so
Cathy,
you can have a higher quality of roads. So the fact that we need to consider safety and resilience is increasing probably a bit the complexity. But that's something that will definitely require something more than what we are doing right now. But I mean, honestly, I've started to look at these aspects relatively recently. So maybe there are already solutions to it. But I would say you are right, Monique, and we should do something. Lavagnon?
Can I?
Yes.
Hi. So can I just add to what Jean-François has said about this design phase, because we also would like, people are familiar with the safety design audits on our roads, but we are also considering if we can add resilience design audits. For example, in the roads that I prepared in North Macedonia, it's a secondary road, rural roads, and we require the government to launch the resilience design audit before they can sign off those roads designs. So that's one thing that we would hope to kind of make this relatively simple and standardized process in order to ensure the resilience side to the secondary and rurals. And also the other thing that I want to add is that in the economic appraisal tool, HDM4, the World Bank has been using for our lending appraisal, we are updating HDM4, which also will include the resilience into the economic appraisal and also update some of the old parameters used in the road safety side of the story. So just these two quick comments and feedback. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jean-François and Jing.
Just-
So to your question, Monique, your question is quite interesting. You made a very good observation in my view. The question of future-proofing infrastructure projects is part and parcel of my research. It has been on the background, but you won't see the word resilience many times in my research because I have not focused on it. So you won't see that in the title of the paper. You will see that in some of the papers. So here is my take on it. So resilience is part of the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances in the environment of the project, especially in the long run. So I have a double take on resilience. The first is that we can consider resilience as a success factor. That's mostly what Jean-François has been talking about. And we can also consider resilience as a success criterion, especially during the evaluation phase of projects. But to me, more fundamentally, resilience is a response to complexity. So the complexity that is posed by the project or the project context. That's how I see it. The typical response that we tend to afford in project management, for instance, or the delivery of the large-scale projects is, oh, you are having a situation that is dealing with complexity. What do you need to do? Well, you need to respond through monitoring. That's what we tend to do. But monitoring is not going to help you in terms of significant adaptation. That's where we need resilience to come into play. So that's how I look at it. For instance, one of my students, my PhD student, is looking at the nexus of complexity and resilience right now in the delivery of infrastructure projects in low and middle-income countries. But we are yet to publish that paper. It's in the books.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Thank you very
thank
much. I just want to apologize. There is I probably made a little mistake. One of my colleagues, Mr. Jean-Claude Tijoux, wanted to attend, and I sent him a link that is obviously linked to Lavagnon's link. This is why you can see two Lavagnon IKA. But there is a homonym which is actually not the right Lavagnon. That's Jean-Claude Tijoux.
Michel,
Sorry
is that my Christmas gift?
Your Christmas gift is Jean-Claude Tijoux. That's his name. He's a consultant specialized in infrastructure in Africa. Okay, my apologies for that, but it allows Jean-Claude to be part of our meeting. Any other question? We still have 10 minutes left for question from the audience. Don't be shy. We can take some more questions on these interesting issues. I remind you that the session is being registered, so you will be able to get back to it. There was plenty of information that would certainly deserve a rehearsal from myself and possibly from some of you as well.
If there is no question, Michel, may I ask a question to Jean-François?
Of course you can,
Okay.
Lavagnon, you're
Yes.
welcome.
So Jean-François, you made a very interesting and informative presentation. I've learned a lot from your presentation, especially on how the World Bank deals with resilience in their infrastructure projects, including roads. My question to you is the following. It is a struggle for many of the developing countries or low-income countries to fund feasibility studies for these projects. So now we're talking about climate proofing these projects and ensuring resilient infrastructure projects. Is it not there a temptation for these governments to just have the roads without thinking about resilience? Because that's easier to do. Because resilience is costly.
I think it's still a temptation, but it's getting less. I mean, when I see, at least in the countries I'm working in, I was expecting to see that behavior that you described more than what I see. What is happening is that you really, I mean, countries are really being hit by floods and or overheating of networks quite a lot. And each time you have a flood, you really have the communities that are completely cut from the rest, and that's fairly strong. And I actually find it easier this time to see people being very receptive to the idea that yes, we need to have a better sizing of the structures than what we had before. In Chad, we just discussed with the government. So they had done some rural roads, and it was mostly by the kilometer, and they agreed to diminish the number of kilometers because there was one community and 50 kilometers of villages that were then cut if we were not doing a bridge. So that I think is I mean, there is more sensitivity than before. I mean, whether it stops the tendency that you have before each electoral campaign to do the maximum number of kilometers, I don't know. But at the technician level, I think it's clear. And at the ministers, I've seen more positive responsiveness than I expected, especially on the resilience, on the road safety, as almost always. It depends on whether you have a real champion at a high level in the government that is really sensitive to safety issues. Otherwise, you can still fight, but that is not an Africa-specific issue. Yeah, that would be my response.
Yeah, this is insightful because the challenge, as always, in these resource-challenged countries is a trade-off between short-term needs and long-term needs, including resilience here.
Yeah, no, but now you really have. I mean, even when you look at economic evaluation of project a few years back, you wouldn't have used the probability of the road to be completely cut as a factor. And now, I mean, we are not yet there completely, but it becomes much more commonplace to justify by risk of access being cut. And I think that the avalanche of natural disasters that we had over the last years is one of the reasons for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Any other question? Okay. If there is no other question, we will still keep the names and emails of the attendants, and probably we'll try to know how you have assessed this webinar. This is important for us. Oh, someone raising his hand. Vinant Bezuidelno. I don't know if I pronounce your name correctly. Okay, you made a comment. Do you want to take the floor, Vinand?
Good day.
Go ahead.
Yes, just in response to the question with regards to the difficulty dealing with the EIB in Africa, I'm transport specialist and based in the Pretoria office. in South Africa for the EIB, from where I oversee a bunch of projects in Africa. And indeed, with our climate bank roadmap, transport lending policy, and being the EU's green bank or climate bank, obviously we have a strong focus on climate, but we are fairly well aligned to the other DFIs, MDBs, since we can only finance up to 50% of project investment cost. We normally work with World Bank, African Development Bank, KfW, AFD. So in that terms, we are fairly well aligned. Going forward, it might be slightly difficult or more difficult in terms of also focusing on capacity improvement. But otherwise, rural projects, programs, we can still finance those.
Okay, thank you very much for this contribution. It's very important for us in our task force to get a vision from various perspectives among the development banks. Thank you very much for this contribution. Any other question, comment, opinion? Okay, we are nearing 4 p.m. French time, so I think we're going to soon to close this this webinar. I want to thank wholeheartedly the participants who succeeded in making themselves available, which was not easy for everybody. I would like to have a special mention on to Pascal Rossini on we plan to have a seminar, an in-person seminar in Dakar early March, whereby we would have Pascal's technical committee 3.3 on asset management being present, plus task force 1.3 on good project preparation. For my task force, it would be a great opportunity for us to meet, because we've been knowing each other only by screen, but we would like to definitely to meet in person at least once before the Prague World Meeting in October next year. In the beginning, I must say that it was not completely clear to me what was the connection between asset management and good project preparation, but I think we have got plenty of food for thought in the presentation that were made, and that show us that the two topics overlap at least in part, and it would be an opportunity for those interested also to participate in this seminar in person. If they want to get more detail, they can either turn to Pascal or myself or the General Secretariat. The meeting should take place again in Dakar, early March. I think it's from 7 to 10 March or something like that. So stay tuned on the PIARC website to learn more about this. If you want to have a replay of this webinar, you should be able to access it as well. And eventually, I want to give again a big thank you to the presenters and also to those who attended. And I hope they will keep in touch so that we can use their expertise more in depth in our task force. Again, a big thank you to all, and goodbye. And do not hesitate to join us if you wish to do so.